Hey Ken, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Really excited to be here. We've been in touch about this for a few years now, so just totally happy to make this happen. Really cool.
Yeah, thanks a ton. And enjoyed seeing your talks at UXDX over the years. For those who aren't familiar with you, can you give us a background and kind of your journey in design and where you're at now?
Yeah, totally. So I've been practicing UX and design for just over 20 years. And, growing up, I always had an affinity for design and art. I wanted to be an architect. As I got closer to choosing a major in college, I didn't feel like I had the math scores or potential to really excel in architecture. So I chose visual design and graphic design. This was early 2000s, late 90s, not to date myself. And when I graduated with a communication design degree, interactive design, as they were calling it at the time, was really kind of part of that whole package. And it was something I was really interested in. So I came out, I worked at an advertising agency, and like a lot of agencies around, the dot-com bubble bursting, they were just kind of taking on any type of work you could imagine. And I actually found myself working on some true like UX and product design projects where I was doing more consulting for a consumer electronics company. And I realized this is what I really loved because a lot of the problems, the way we thought about design was very similar to architecture. And I thought there might be a future here for me that really kind of scratches that itch of I want to be an architect, but now I can apply those skills in a different way. So I joined a consultancy in Philadelphia. This is really where I learned what UX is and how to do it. I felt like the leadership at that company was very like-minded, and I just was surrounded by just incredibly talented people. So the company was actually called Electronic Ink. It's now part of Frog Design. We did a lot of B2B consulting. And at one point, as I was getting this like amazing UX education there and really starting to flourish as a designer, this was about 5 years into my career, I realized was spending a lot of energy just like helping out other companies, becoming more efficient. We solved a lot of really interesting challenges, but ultimately there were times where I felt like I was just making rich people richer, and I wanted to do something more impactful with my skills. So I became a bit more mission driven in my approach, and I thought, how might I apply my skills in a way that could be truly beneficial to people? And I started looking around for opportunities to do that. And at the time, this is around 2015, I felt like Google was a great place to do that. They were working on a lot of really interesting projects that had a lot of positive impact for different groups. So I joined the company back then. And as I went through, I started to realize I had this passion for infographics, data visualization, and really the presentation of information in our products. And I joined a team that was solely focused on data viz with a wonderful leader who he's written several books. He was just a really great mentor and really kind of helped me find my career path forward. And since then, I've been able to apply those skills to different product areas. I worked in visualizations for Fitbit and Google Health and consumer hardware. I also did some consulting work on some of our COVID visualizations on search during the pandemic years ago, and even work on projects like Loon, which is the balloons that would fly in the stratosphere and provide broadband and LTE coverage to underserved regions around the world. So in all those cases, I felt like I was really achieving that mission. And then at one point, I started to think a lot about accessibility and how can we make data and visualizations, especially, more accessible to people with different types of disabilities. Again, really kind of like serving that mission I had mentioned. And most recently, I actually moved over to Waymo because I feel like there's a really interesting mission there as well. And I was asked to bring that data viz expertise into the company. So for the last year, I've actually been working on Waymo driverless vehicles and thinking about how we can make transportation and mobility more accessible for people, which again, really kind of like gets into that mission that I set out to work on 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's crazy. I just took my first Waymo in SF and it's coming to Colorado soon. And I was
Yeah,
thinking, like, our generation, people can't drive stick. And then our future, the next few generations, people aren't going to know how to drive because that technology is so incredible. So I love it. And the safety implications of that, reducing
yeah,
human error when everyone's texting when driving. So
yep.
yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense. But you've also written a few books around UX, data, viz as well.
Yeah.
Tell us about your more recent one and kind of the impetus
Yeah.
behind that. And then also, it sounds like you had a ton of interesting interviews along the way.
Yeah, totally. So I'm working with CRC Press and Routledge on a new book called Data Visualization in the Age of AI. And over the last few years, I've been working really at that intersection. The book focuses on two angles of the problem. There's the first kind of perspective or angle is how might visualizations improve an AI product? And I did a lot of work in Google Health and Fitbit, thinking about their generative charting program and how we can use pictures of data and infographics as part of an LLM's response to your questions about your health metrics and your activity metrics. And I've also worked a lot on visualizing, explaining the decisions and justifications of the behavior for autonomous systems, whether it's like a fleet of Waymo vehicles or something like the control plane for Project Loon, which had this ML enhanced solver that made all the decisions for how data would be routed across the constellation. So there was a lot there. And I really wanted to focus on the opportunity because I think a lot of us are thinking about, well, how are my skills still relevant as, human designer today? And kind of drawing from that experience, I think it's a really great time to be a designer. And there's a lot of opportunities. And one thing that I've learned along the way, the process and our values has not changed, even though the technology has drastically changed. And I really want that to come forward in the book. So that's one perspective. The second is how might AI change the way in which we work and create visualizations too? And I think that gets more into like the vibe coding and how AI fits into people's processes. How do you use AI to explore a multitude of different design solutions, and how might it positively impact your work, but also understanding when it's important to have that human intervention in the process, and how do we uphold craft, and how do we know what good looks like in this new era, and how do we apply all of those classic skills and bring originality back into the work and stuff too as human beings.
Yeah, that makes me think of just responding kind of those two areas. I think a lot of these AI tools, thinking of Claude Code, which at the time of this recording is the hot one and has been for
Oh
the
yeah.
past for really only the past 4 months, which blows my mind. At the beginning of 2026, it was still OpenAI, so who knows where this is headed? But I think if I think about that tool, it's still complex. It's not
Yeah.
intuitive, and you're talking about on the output for an older generation or someone who's not frankly a coder who can use that tool so intuitively. How could those tools basically improve their UX through better
Yeah.
visualization as an output instead of like walls of text or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that where
Totally.
you see like the UX of AI is definitely an interesting area for me. Is that where you see output going for those models? Just to because I've also read a bunch about how they struggle with math.
Yeah. So, kind of going to the first perspective in the book, like if you think about the UX of AI, there's two specific chapters that get into this topic. So there's this whole world that was opened up to me through this book opportunity as I was doing my research around AI interpretability, and I was working with some folks who are nice enough to contribute content from Anthropic. I've had some colleagues that were data journalists that moved into Google and worked on the brain and big picture team, and then moved on to working on AI interpret. And what's really interesting about that is they're basically using visualizations to take a peek into the model and looking at how it's thinking in real time. And really, like a lot of the visualizations probably aren't going to see the light of day really outside of technical papers or journal articles or publications. We as users or the consumer public probably won't ever touch those visualizations, consume them or use them. But it's interesting how they're being used internally with the research teams to put better safeguards on models and use them to kind of understand, okay, if it's thinking about this feature in a certain way, how can we make sure that safety is upheld and ethics and stuff like that? So I thought that was a really fascinating use case. Then there's like the explainability side too, which is a little different, where it's like, okay, this thing already made a decision and it moved forward with it, but now we want to investigate why did it make that decision? What evidence did it consider in its decision making? And that gets more into the AI explainability piece. Now, in the book, we're not really examining generative AI or LLMs for that. It's more other applications of AI like complex autonomous systems. And in the book, I draw a lot from my experience working on Project Loon and space communications, and then also a bit on some of the work that we've been doing at Waymo as well.
Makes sense. So yeah, you were talking about more like B2B internal dashboards for complex systems. Got it. And then something
Yeah,
else you alluded to is I'm also interested in like you see an engineer with AI now being able to do some design or a product manager being
yeah,
able to do some dev,
yeah.
right? And so is there a path, for the UX audience or the research audience listening to this that says, hey, Kent, I wasn't as good at math as you were in school, but I'd love to be better at building, statistically relevant visualizations. Like, what would you tell those folks? Like, how is AI helping them achieve that?
Yeah, totally. So I think for people who might be less technical, one of kind of like the core values always with data visualization is start with a real data set and work with that and try to figure out the shape of that data sooner than later. See, what do the outliers and edge cases look like? And then start using that to inform the design decisions around choosing the right form for the visualization. And what I've been doing with a lot of my work now is some of the visualizations are pretty complex. You have thousands of nodes and edges, like in a network graph. It takes a lot of time to manually draw that out in Figma. So now we have the luxury of connecting to an actual data set. You remove all the overhead of initially setting that up in code, which is awesome. And for people who don't really have coding experience, this is huge value add.
Yeah.
And now you can actually, with a few prompts, start working with the data and see some general lo-fi sketches, right? And try some different layouts out and see like what tells the story the best. So there's that. I also think I've always been a proponent of concept testing. So I've been using LLMs and generative AI as a sketching tool. But now with my concept testing, I don't have this prescribed linear workflow that I'm evaluating with users as they're interacting with the visualization. They can kind of do whatever they want with it because all the interactivity is there and it kind of works. And I found I can build more robust prototypes much quicker. And I can have a looser discussion guide with my concept test sessions and some of my usability studies that I've been conducting that have really yielded some great results. So I feel like early in the process, these tools are just absolutely fantastic in terms of design exploration, especially with data viz when you're working with very complex data sets and you removed a lot of overhead in setting up a prototype or just manually drawing things.
Yeah, so that's pretty much the same parallels we see to prototyping or like code generation,
Yeah.
like that
Yeah.
early, the hardest impetus point of like, man, what is this visualization going to look like? It's
Hmm.
so complex. Like, boom,
Yeah.
here's 10 ideas, right? Yeah. What I think you touched on this a little bit too. I think it's a tough time for designers looking to get into the field. I think it's a tough time for managers trying to navigate AI. What advice do you have for folks like navigating this era where I think sounds like you were doing LLMs before this era as well. So maybe you have some unique
Yeah.
insights to how to
It,
navigate this.
Yeah, and it was interesting because when I started working with LLMs, we were actually building a product that was a chat UI where formerly Fitbit customers, now Google Health customers could come in and start asking questions. And we were thinking like, how do we manually kind of manipulate the output and train the model to start showing pictures and data and stuff as part of the consumer experience? So if I use that example, and this was really like my talk at UXDX, like the process hasn't changed. And we have all the context as designers, as researchers, as people who work in UX. And I still strongly believe that that context can really help us no matter what kind of tools we're using in design. That's really our superpower. And I don't believe that that's going to change. So I think for an entry level designer, it's just kind of like getting really good at understanding how to gather those requirements and that human context. Because after all, in a lot of cases, humans are likely using the products that we're creating. I know there's people who say, oh, well, your work might be consumed by AI at some point, which is true. But still, I think those values are really helpful. I actually have two other topics I'd love to chat about here that I think are really relevant. So one is just seeing the creativity coming through. So if you think of AI, it's a collection of human knowledge up until today. And as I've been doing a lot of research for my book, I've been talking to a lot of folks who are really talented data artists. And what we're seeing is it's difficult sometimes to prompt an LLM to help you create something completely new. So I think having that appetite for exercising creativity, flexing that muscle is really important. And something AI can help us with initially is opening up time for more design exploration. Try many different ideas out and then have a good understanding of why some are working and others are failing. And then let those fail fast and move on to a whole new set of ideas. So when we're thinking about divergent thinking, I would personally love to see designers in general just do much more design exploration and thinking more broadly. I think what we're starting to see, and I've been seeing this with some of the colleagues that I've been interviewing for my book research, is that some of those less typical visualizations that might be more exploratory in nature, might be a bit new or even wacky at times, might actually tell the story better. And with AI, we have the opportunity to explore that in a way we haven't before. So I think there's an opportunity there. Yeah. And then I had another point too about opportunities for younger designers coming into the field. I think we've seen a lot of folks go through different UX boot camps. I've seen a lot of portfolios in the past 4 or 5 years, and a lot of the portfolios look the same, and they really focus on the design thinking process. So you'll get more for each case study, more of a description of the process rather than what this person did on this particular project.
Yeah.
And because a lot of these portfolios are starting to look the same, every individual has their own set of unique superpowers. So I think it's important to show what you can bring to the table that's unique to you that maybe your peers can't. And I think that brings a different, more personalized lens to the work that would definitely pique the interest of a lot of hiring managers like myself in the past who are looking for new talent to join their teams.
No, I love that. That's invaluable advice because just as you mentioned, like the outputs from AI can seem average. If your portfolio
Yeah,
looks average, then it's, like take a risk, be wacky on
totally.
there, be different, right? Stand out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And different with purpose too, because if you've done
Right.
your
Yeah.
homework and your research, you know why that
Yeah.
different solution works and can tell us about it in an interview
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. No, totally agree on all fronts. Ken, where can folks go to follow you, find your book, and find all of the information you're putting out there?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's probably my most active social account. I also post when I'm going to be sharing talks and participating in panels at conferences like UXDX and some others coming up there as well. So that's probably the best source for now, and I can share the link with you too, Alex, if you'd like for everyone.
Awesome. Cool, Kent. Well, thanks so much for joining today and sharing these insights.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. This is super fun.